Hey, everybody, welcome to Pod Casty For Me, the podcast about film, culture, politics, and Clint Eastwood, where we watch every film directed by and or starring American filmmaker Clint Eastwood and explore how they speak to their moment in this one. Podcast is hosted by two guys. I'm one of the guys. My name is Jake Serwin.
I'm one of the guys. My name is Ian Ryan.
He's back on it. He said he wasn't one of the guys recently, and it hurt my feelings. He just said his name.
That's right. I was trying to be inclusive of our guests.
Well, it's 2023, and now anyone could be guys.
That's right.
I don't know if you've kept up on TikTok or anything like that. Let's bring our guest in. Let's waste no time. Our guest today is the host of the podcast Junk Filter, and in my opinion, one of the finest posters on the whole internet. Welcome to the show, Jesse Hawken.
Thank you for having me. Lovely to meet you guys.
Welcome, Jesse.
Yeah, really nice to have you. Today, we are talking true crime.
It's finally happened. It's come true.
This is officially a true crime podcast. We're about to hit it big today. As of today, we are going to become popular.
It's true. As of today, you are now a true crime podcast.
Yes. Yeah.
Exactly.
Welcome, Murderinos.
You should get some sponsors for this one.
Oh, yeah. Today we're sponsored by, what's that app that was like Cop Watch app? Or not Cop Watch. That sounds good. The one that was like Citizen.
Yeah.
Yeah. Today we're sponsored by Citizen.
Ring, Nest.
Yeah. Yes, we're sponsored by Ring and Nest as well. So let's just get right into our signature segment, the two questions. Jesse, were you able to come up with a question for us?
I was even able to come up with two questions.
Oh.
Wow. An overachiever. Well, let's have it.
Well, considering that this episode is Clint's death penalty movie, I'm against capital punishment. I'm a good leftist. I think that for the most part, it should never be used. But my first question to you guys is there anyone that you think should get the death penalty?
Well,
he's
this
right here in the
proves that
room
you
with
haven't.
us, folks.
Yeah. Okay. There you go. Meanwhile, I actually like Jesse, and I don't think he should be put to death. But that's what Ian has to say.
Never say this.
You know, I think I have all but called for violence a few times on the show, mostly toward very powerful people. This is sort of a difficult spot that I find myself in as trying to be a good leftist, because I'm, of course, against the death penalty. But then you hear about some of these guys in the news, and you think, boy, wouldn't it be nice to have a quick way for them to no longer be in the news?
They make you just hopping mad to hear about these guys.
I don't know. We've really opened a can of worms here. I don't really know what you do. Luckily, there's truly decades, perhaps centuries, honestly, of people trying to imagine an alternative to the criminal justice system as it currently exists, and they've thought of things to do with your Elon Musk's and what have you, places for them to be removed from danger-causing potential while still not cleaving their heads from their bodies. And it's a good thing that I'm not in charge of making those decisions, but it's a bad thing that the people who are in charge of making those decisions are currently in charge, because some of them are like Elon Musk or whatever. So that's my answer.
Good answer. I want to applaud Jesse, clearly a mature thinker, able to give us two clear options here, because if you're asking me if there's anybody who I believe deserves the death penalty, I'm right there with you. I'm going to just say a hard no, because I think we all understand the death penalty would mean that the state is imposing this punishment.
I like where you're going with this. I'm getting excited. I'm thinking about some of the implications of what you're saying.
Okay, great. But if we're talking about people who might die incidentally in a revolutionary type scenario, I think that's much tougher to say. I think that's been used to justify bad things historically, but also, I don't know if I can hold it against people in a colonial context or something who are fighting for their liberation actively. Right. If they end up killing somebody, I don't know, not my place to really judge them. There are plenty of people who I would be happy if they suffered a sudden accident, but that's different than trying to impose my will on the world.
Well, thinking about revolutionary contexts, also, I'm imagining some of these guys have maybe like a car that they designed, and the car could maybe revolve in any of a number of directions off of a bridge or a mountain highway.
Or just do one of the main things it's designed to do: explode in flames at high speed.
Yeah, it's actually really good at that. If you think about him as a
it's one of the
burning
best
car
cars you can
manufacturer,
get.
extremely successful. Yeah,
But I will say, I am constantly surprised that I think there are leftists who defend the death penalty in certain contexts, usually aimed at the bourgeois, but sometimes just for like mass murders or something. We'll get into it, I'm sure, but
yeah,
I'm just not sure that creates, even if you're in a temporary state, a communist state that's withering away, is that what you want your state to be doing, to be killing people?
Right.
I don't think so.
And I think that is ultimately, spoiler alert, ultimately sort of the message of the film. It's like, if anybody should be making these decisions, it's not these people.
Yep. But yes, Jesse.
Whose head would you remove from their body?
Well, I'm along the same page as you guys that, the people that generally are making the decisions about who should be executed are also fine candidates for being punished by death.
Yeah. I was thinking about that as well. Well, and often they're mass murderers themselves. If you just look at the numbers,
Yeah, well, that's the cliche, right? If you kill one person, you're a murderer. If you kill 10,000, you can use it to run for re-election.
Yeah.
Or get a Netflix show about jobs or whatever he did.
Yeah.
I think the state shouldn't be making these decisions, but I'm okay with concepts like in that Peter Hyams movie, The Star Chamber, where some people get together to decide who should die. I prefer that form of justice. I don't want elected officials to be doing it. I want an evil cabal of people who control the world to be making these calls.
Second Star Chamber reference on the show recently, very interesting. On our A Perfect World episode, Chad Harbold was pushing hard for Peter Hyams as auteur, and especially the Star Chamber.
Hyams is a very special filmmaker because he's his own cinematographer.
Right. Yeah.
So, that's like the Otani of film. You don't usually have a director who's also the cameraman.
Right. Yeah. Peter Hyams was, speaking of true crime, I couldn't remember the name of the goddamn movie. Speaking of true crime, Peter Hyams is on camera in the OJ Made in America documentary.
He is?
Well, yeah, because he made Capricorn 1, which stars OJ, and they're friends, and then he tells the story about going to visit OJ in prison and Lyle Menendez walking by in the background. And all his stories do heavily feature protagonist Peter Hyams, but
it's one of the best things about the OJ Made in America documentary, which is my choice for the best movie of the 2010s, that it has at least 20 minutes of Peter Hyams content in it.
Yeah.
6-hour miniseries with a good almost half hour of Peter Hyams. You're speaking my language.
I wanted to watch the campy American Crime Story thing, but I didn't know. I felt that I didn't know enough of the particulars of the OJ trial, so I decided I would watch Made in America first. And wouldn't you know, at the end of that, I no longer wanted to watch the fun, campy one with John Travolta playing Robert Kardashian. Have you seen either of these, Ian? Have you seen this doc?
I've seen parts of Made in America. I haven't seen the whole thing. This was such a huge social event, a rare, interesting thing that people were talking about, not just on, was Letterboxd around when, I guess maybe this is
true
early
to form,
days.
I watched it about 7 years later, but
great. So you could participate.
Jesse, have you seen the Ryan Murphy version, Jesse?
Bits and pieces of it. Fatal miscasting of Cuba Gooding Jr. as OJ. But there are some good supporting performances in it. I didn't hold my attention to watch for the entire thing. It has a really strong pedigree, but I don't know. I would much rather watch a solid documentary about the story than to have actors doing the reenactments.
Yeah.
But what's her face? Sarah Paulson was very well cast as Marcia Clark.
Sarah Paulson's great. And I was thinking that during my watch of True Crime, if this had been about a real event, I think I agree with you, Jesse. Almost always better to watch a documentary about something horrific that you have to wrestle with ethically, whereas watching people try to be serious and represent murder victims' families or something very, very difficult to pull off.
Speaking of that, on the Blu-ray, there is what I assume was originally a DVD special feature, the Blu-ray of True Crime, called something like True Crime: True Stories, where it's an extended interview with a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist who became aware of this guy who was convicted of armed robbery but sentenced to 55 years, and he was old enough that was effectively a life sentence. his alibi was that he was hitchhiking at the time, and he had all of this evidence about we stopped at this gas station. The trucker who picked me up had a kangaroo on his dashboard because his CB nickname was Kangaroo. But the guy gets thrown in jail anyway. 8 years later, he's already served 8 years of this sentence. This journalist smells something fishy. His famous nose starts a twitching, and he, with a member of the Dallas Police Department or something, they travel on the guy's alleged route, and they end up he like places an ad in a trucker magazine and ends up finding somebody who knows Kangaroo, and they find Kangaroo, and then they have to go to the trucking company is out of business, so they have to go to some flood damaged barn where all the files have been kept so they can find the receipt from this such and such gas station that proves he was in Kansas at the time. Anyway, the guy gets off, and then he's left, released from prison. 18 months later, he gets hit by a car and killed.
Fuck.
And then at the end of this little like 22-minute special feature, it says the film True Crime is not based on this story. Just like an interesting thing that happened. Yep. Honestly, one of the funniest special features I've ever seen. Just for that reason, I was like doubled over. I could not believe what I was seeing. But yeah, I mean, this is not. I was surprised that this is not based on a real thing. We'll get into it in a second. I do believe we are owed one more question, Jesse. Not to put you back on the spot here.
Oh yeah. Well, this is a movie from one of the greatest years in movies, which was 1999.
Yes.
I'm very pleased that Clint made a movie along with Michael Mann and Stanley Kubrick and Paul Thomas Anderson and Claire Denis and Pedro Almodovar and David Lynch. Just so many great filmmakers making great movies in 1999. And I guess my question to you guys is, what is your favorite movie from 1999?
A great question. Probably the one that I was going to ask if called upon. I mean, it's sort of a boring answer, but I would say The Matrix probably was my favorite.
My first thought, certainly the one that I've seen the most from 1999 and will continue to love. Good pick.
Thank you. I did fail to watch the other death row film from 1999, The Green Mile.
This is a contender for you.
Episode, but I do want to shout out that movie, which I've heard is very normal and not messed up in any way.
No.
Ian, what about you? You were going to say Tea with Mussolini, right?
That's right. Yeah. I mean, I'm with Jesse. Not even just the sort of like high pedigree films, just a lot of great, like Stir of Echoes I watched last year for Hooptober.
Stir of Echoes rules. Yeah.
Or maybe 2 years ago. Just a lot of like fun, strange. Office Space is maybe 99 also.
She's All That.
She's All That. There you go.
10 Things I Hate About You. Both a lot of fun.
Mr. Heath. My very favorite, I'm not sure. I think The Matrix is a good pick. Yeah, and Magnolia I love. I think it's so extensive that it's hard to say there's nothing wrong with it. But
yeah,
I don't know. I think it's maybe the most 1999 of all the films. So I'll go with that just because I think
Doug's first movie. Shout out to Doug's first movie also. What about you, Jesse? What's your favorite?
Yeah, what do you got?
My favorite movie of 1999 is The Insider by Michael Mann.
Oh,
another movie about the power of journalism.
Right.
Except, this is wish fulfillment portrayal of journalism, whereas The Insider is more like how the sausages are made.
Yeah, and
Diane Venora.
Another film starring
Diane Venora in it.
Yeah.
Yes,
as her famous character of wife.
Put upon wife.
She was a big interpreter of the wife.
She's not in very much of The Insider, and it seems like she's not in very much of this movie until she gets her big show-stopping monologue.
Absolutely, yeah, and of course she is playing a version of Chan Parker. In all of these films. I think that's the original character. Well, let's get into it. Thank you very much for the questions, Jesse. Today, as I mentioned, we're talking True Crime, film directed by Clint Eastwood. Not to spoil it, but I think as of now, this is maybe my favorite Clint Eastwood movie. Just, I don't know why, but it just, it hits me. It checks all of the boxes for what I'm looking for in a Clint Eastwood movie. Like when I'm watching, an Unforgiven or a High Plains Drifter, I feel like I am, which are two of my other favorites. I feel like I am engaging with a work of art a little more than this, which feels like a movie. This is maybe not my favorite Clint Eastwood film, to make a very stupid distinction, but it's my favorite Clint Eastwood movie, I think. If you want to watch this film and you're in the United States, you can check that out on all the usual places you get your Amazons and your Red Boxes and things like this. Ian, for the folks down there in Mexico, where can they check out the film True Crime?
If they want to check out Imminent Execution, they can find it on Microsoft, they can find it on Amazon, and they can find it on Apple TV.
Now, Jesse, I don't know if you're familiar with this on the show. I used to make this joke about how in Mexico it's called Manzana TV because they speak Spanish down there. And then Ian pointed out that this is not very polite to the great people of Mexico. And so I stopped.
True as well.
Yeah, also that. And so I stopped saying it. But sometimes someone will barge into the studio where we're recording. We're all in the same place, of course, in this bit. And say it for me. And here, I think someone from one of those great 1999 films has joined us.
Ooh.
Manzana TV. Manzana TV.
He got the AI Jar Jar got a little confused about the Z sound. He's like eating. I think he's eating his famous space apple in that.
That's right.
I did give it away, but I figured also that would be fairly obvious. Just to derail the conversation as quickly as possible, Jesse, where do you stand on the Star Wars prequels?
Well, I thought they were bad until I saw the sequels.
Yeah, I feel the same way.
Yeah, the big reclamation project for me with the prequels was the Red Letter Media takedowns of them. I felt that they actually improved the overall experience of watching them because they get into sort of prosecutorial detail about what's the matter with them.
Yes.
You know, the Phantom Menace I saw not on opening night. I thought I'd give it a few days because I saw in Toronto, there were all these nerds dressed up as Jedis and shit who were lined up for like a week before the movie came out.
Yeah.
This was like the main news story at the time. Maybe this was just because I was 7 years old. This is the main news story I could process.
Yeah,
but this is all I remember people talking about, being lined up for 36 hours.
But I managed to convince a friend of mine to give it a few days and then we can go see it together, which, you know, he's such a good friend that he actually did what I asked and didn't race off to see it. He actually waited for me for a little while. So we went to see it at the Late Show at this brand new movie theater that we had in Toronto called the Paramount, which was probably built because Star Wars was coming. They were like, we got to build this brand new multiplex downtown to handle the Phantom Menace. And so we went to like the 11:30 show. And around the 20-minute mark, it started to settle in for both of us that this movie is not going to get any better than this. And so, you know, we basically suffered in silence through it. Then about 3 years later, I went to see Attack of the Clones and I was in Los Angeles visiting a friend of mine. So I forced him to take me to Mann's Chinese Theater to watch.
Nice.
And it was one of my first fully digital screenings in the early days of digital presentation. Yeah. So I was in the ultimate environment to watch Attack of the Clones. I was in the legendary Chinese Theater in LA watching this beautiful digital transfer of Attack of the Clones. And when the movie was over,
to love it.
Yeah, well, it was, there's nowhere to go but up was what I was thinking.
Right.
So when the movie was over, I had to go and wash my eyes out in the bathroom because they were stinging from how incoherent the movie got. Like towards the end, the big light show and, you know, the 5 different story arcs all crashing into each other at the same time. Like I felt like I was in the mind of a madman watching it. So, and my eyes hurt so much that I had to go rinse them out, which I've never done before at a movie.
That is my, not that I am a full prequel reclaimer, but I will say that I do find them fascinating as an insight into the mind of a madman, whereas the Disney films feel like an insight into the mind of a boardroom, you know?
Yeah.
I love this. This is like, you would imagine the mind of a madman is like reading Naked Lunch or something, but in fact it's watching a Star Wars that just leaves you just totally confused about what like we were supposed to care about.
An overabundance of red carpet.
Yeah. And it looked like a telenovela too. Like it was just so uninspired visually. It's just people sitting there in front of backgrounds talking.
We have to round out the trilogy. How was your viewing of Revenge of the Sith?
Revenge of the Sith was mid, which was better than the first 2.
Yeah.
It felt like you should have started here. They should have done a Star Wars trilogy that started with him turning into Darth Vader and then 2 more movies with Darth Vader in them. Because that was finally we're at the point where interesting things are happening. Right. I don't think that you can get very much insight from a series that is ultimately a big downer about this little child who turned into a genocidal
Yeah.
monster, intergalactic monster.
But enough about Gavin Newsom.
It was a little better. It was just a little bit better, and so I would say it was mid. I don't dislike it like I dislike the first two, but I wasn't thrilled about how it all worked out. And then I saw the sequels, and now the prequels I can appreciate more as, white elephant art, like this ridiculous, overexpensive,
goofy,
into the mind of a madman, the dangers of nobody saying no to you,
Exactly.
Whereas the sequels were like total boardroom market research and continually course correcting to the point that when it's all over, nothing matters.
I agree wholeheartedly, except that I would say I think The Phantom Menace is the most interesting of them because it's the one that has a plot, as dinky as it is. But I do remember my screening of Revenge of the Sith was tainted because I was wearing my Darth Vader helmet and a t-shirt and brought a lightsaber, and me and my friend were fighting each other on the staircase of the movie theater before it started, and my lightsaber glanced off of his and hit a bald man very hard on the back of his head, and then I felt so bad. So that's
that was
mostly
the
what I
dark
remember.
side. That was the dark side
Exactly.
creeping in.
Yeah.
Well, I mistook him for a Tuscan woman and child.
The only thing that I've liked from the Disney Star Wars era is the Andor series, which is excellent.
This is a famous.
Given it a chance.
Yeah.
This is a famous bone of contention on the show.
I can't
where
tell if you're messing with us, Jesse.
I'm not messing with you. I enjoyed it.
No. I love Andor. We've just talked about it maybe 5 times, and it seems like we're here only to punish Jake for not.
Yeah. Well, one of the writers of this film is credited on an episode of Andor.
Yes.
He was on Stephen Schiff, one of the credited screenwriters of this film, was and also Ian's other favorite show, The Americans, because he loves to look at people's butts.
I love American propaganda. I do love The Americans, actually.
And you also love American Assassin, starring Dylan
do
O'Brien
not,
and
I
Michael
won't let
Keaton.
you say this.
And so Stephen Schiff was one of the only non-Gilroys credited with an Andor script. Him and Beau Willimon, creator of House of Cards,
House of Cards.
which Ian just rewatched, I think. Is that right, Ian?
Yeah.
Well, let's get into it. So, Jesse, when we were chatting about you coming on the show, did I propose this? Did you propose this? I don't
proposed
remember.
It. Okay,
Yeah,
you gave me a list of possibilities, and I went with the one that I had never actually watched.
Wow! So
one of the joys of this overall podcasting empire that I'm creating is that it's basically this flimsy excuse for me to finally watch movies and then talk about them with my guests.
Yeah.
So I love to be invited to do the same thing on someone else's show.
we're so glad to have you.
Well, this was like Clint did. You know how Clint does straight runs of things? Like lately,
Yes.
he's been doing these investigations into what it means to be a hero and what is the point of heroism and things like that. But in the 90s, he was doing that huge run of adapting recent bestsellers. I think he broke it up with, what year was Space Cowboys? Was that in the 90s?
It was after.
Yeah,
this.
it's right
This is
after.
2000. Yeah.
So, he loved to adapt recent bestsellers. Very smart tactic, especially in that sort of John Grisham era of, Alan J. Pakula getting the rights to novels that hadn't actually been published yet because they were known quantities.
Exactly.
The kind of stuff that you'd buy at the Hudson News stand at the airport.
Yeah.
Instant name recognition just because it's a book you've seen at the airport in the last 2 years. So this huge run of The Bridges of Madison County, Absolute Power, Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil. And then to finish off the 20th century, Clint adapting this 1995 novel by the conservative commentator now, Andrew Clavin or Clavin.
Clavin, yeah.
Like Cliff Clavin from Cheers.
Exactly. Or I was thinking like Professor Frink, one of Professor Frink's noises on The Simpsons. He always, his Jerry Lewis type sound.
The Jerry Lewis Clavin. Yeah.
Yeah. Jesse, you messaged me on Twitter with a link to one of Andrew Clavin's very insightful YouTube videos. He has a podcast called The Andrew Clavin Show, brought to us by our friends over there at the Daily Wire.
Oh, yeah. Big Benny Shapiro. Well, not big.
Interesting. Yeah, short Benny Shapiro. Andrew Clavin, interestingly, his son is married to a man who is the general counsel of the Daily Wire, sort of a wrinkle that I didn't realize was going on over there. Andrew Klavan one of those guys who is Jewish and converts to Protestantism and then writes a book about it.
Mm-hmm. Describes himself as a former liberal who became a conservative. That's a typical boomer pipeline.
Yeah,
exactly.
Some of the smuggest
you were never really
world.
liberal if you've turned into a Reagan conservative. You were probably not actually a liberal.
I have here a clip of one of his jokes. I'd love to play for you guys. This is from his video series Klavan on the Culture. This is just a quick joke from the man.
That's why today we here at Klavan on the Culture would like to lay out what we consider the only plan likely to bring tranquility, freedom, and justice to the region. The one-state solution in which the entire Middle East is given to the Jews.
So that's basically the kind of shit that he's saying on that show.
Can I read you the blurb for his pod?
Please.
This is on Apple Podcasts. End of Western civilization got you down? All is tickety-boo on the Andrew Klavan Show as Andrew laughs his way through Armageddon with political satire, cultural commentary, interviews, and relentless mockery of racial pieties, sexual perversities, and feminist absurdities.
Yeah, his the fall of Western civilization he's describing, according to one other video of his that I watched, is young women with chronic illnesses going on TikTok to say that they're going to wear a mask to the Taylor Swift show and they're going to offer free masks if anyone else wants one.
Cool. It's like the 14 words, but you're just afraid that it's not exactly like your little Midwest small town was in 1970.
They don't apply to him anymore because he converted, so he's cool. I do want to shout out his son, Spencer Klavan, who's got just such a squishable face. He studied classical Greek at Oxford and has written books with titles like How to Save the West, Ancient Wisdom for 5 Modern Crises. And also he wrote an article for the American Institute for Economic Research in 2022 about how Roger Ebert was wrong. Video games are indeed works of art. In which he cites Adorno and Horkheimer for some reason. And it's just very much like, very good, Spencer, we're going to put this right up on the refrigerator for you. And it was next to an article with the headline, Why Maui Needs Spectators Now. So, really good website. Loved checking that out. Jesse, what's your Clint experience overall? What's your history with the man? How do you feel about the man?
I'm a fan of Clint. I've gone through fallow periods where I have not liked his work. Clint was, the icon. I saw so many of his movies all through my life, and he was like an ABC Sunday night movie standard. Like you would definitely catch up to things like Sudden Impact on, 1985 on ABC Sunday night movie. He's one of my favorite conservatives. He's one of the few conservatives who makes interesting art. And that has to count for something. I would love to have a beer with Clint. If you're listening, anytime you're in Toronto, I would definitely have a drink with you. Maybe not 2 drinks, though. We'll see.
Yeah, well, he seems like
smart.
he's a beer and wine man.
I went through an anti-Clint phase, though, in the 2000s when I saw $1 Million Baby. Which was so overrated. Maybe I should watch it again now that I'm in a more forgiving mood about Clint. But at the time, I thought, this is an oppressively ugly and bland-looking movie, and he might be making too many movies. On the other hand, I think Unforgiven is one of the best movies there is. Mm-hmm. So, I went through this period where I really didn't care, like Flags of Our Fathers and J. Edgar. I should catch up to that sometime. Mm-hmm. But around American Sniper, I started to become interested in what has been termed late style Clint Eastwood. You'll certainly be talking about all these things later. But, I have a great deal of respect for The Strange 1517 to Paris and for Richard Jewell. And those are the 2 movies where Clint's anti-aesthetics are good because they actually are. The fact that these movies are oppressive and ugly looking is thematic to me because he's talking about modern life in the United States, which is oppressive and ugly. So Clint's anti-art sort of approach of just shooting it and one take will be fine kind of stuff is thematically interesting for this period that he's been exploring. On the other hand, I watched Sully and I thought it was boring. I still have to watch Jersey Girls. Or sorry, not Jersey Girls. That's Jersey Girl, the Kevin Smith movie.
Yeah, you should watch
Jersey
that
Boys.
too.
I should watch that too because I understand it's pretty nuts. And American Sniper was a movie that I kind of admired, even if I didn't agree with what Clint was saying. I thought that it was very well made and that Bradley Cooper was fantastic in the movie, but I didn't buy a lot of what was being said. But that's fine because I don't have to agree with the art that I consume. I thought that there was enough criticism of the point that Clint was making in that movie that would satisfy watching the movie from a liberal or a left sort of perspective.
Yeah.
The fact that Clint's ongoing themes about the corrosive effect of violence on your soul was there in the movie, even if he was being extremely light on the real Chris Kyle, who, of course, was bragging about killing people off the roof of the Superdome during Hurricane Katrina, whether or not that's true.
Looters. And I believe also turns out to have mostly been a liar, according to many accounts of what he said.
Yeah, which I relate to him on that.
And in the great tradition of Westerns, print the legend, right? Like this is a movie that puts up the official version of bad people, which is like actually the whole story of American history.
Saul Rubinek's character, I believe, wrote American W.W. Beauchamp. Is that his name?
Yeah.
Do you find that, Jesse, you're joining us here from the great city of Toronto? Do you find, home to many wonderful film podcasters in my experience, do you find that the Canadian perspective on Clint does this give you any kind of appropriate distance? Do you find that as sort of a film person who's often seeing America showing itself to you as a non-American, do you find this affects your positions on Clint at all? Do you find it has no effect?
Well, we do have that glorious distance from America when we watch these things. Like, for instance, the night of the 2012 Republican convention, where everyone got so angry at Clint for talking to the chair, I was jumping up and down in my seat. I was loving it because I thought that Clint was damning Romney with faint praise by, like he was doing this weird avant-garde thing because all of the Republicans were too afraid to say no to whatever Clint wanted to do. Like, yo, you want to, on primetime television, you want to talk to an empty chair for 10 minutes in a skit that went so long that it went past 11 o'clock, which meant that the official announcement that Romney was the nominee was out of prime time and all the local news channels had cut to local news.
Hell yeah.
And I thought that Clint did that on purpose. I thought that, if Clint might be a secret operative who's trying to ruin Romney. And his endorsement of Romney was so half-assed. Like he said, maybe we need a businessman, a quote unquote businessman. He did like air quotes. And, and they cut to Paul Ryan looking furious in like his box seat. And I thought, good for you, Clint. But all these libs were so angry at Clint for betraying them because they all thought that he was a Hollywood, like the good conservative, like the guy who makes the Super Bowl ads about how America's economy is roaring back and that he was in favor of Obama trying to bail out the auto industry. So this was like a stab in the back to them, whereas I was like, give it time, give it time. I think Clint's doing something here. I think he's forcing the Republicans to have Romney as their nominee. Now, what I've realized in the aftermath, though, is that was one of the main moments that sent that party into madness. Like the vindictiveness got even worse from that moment on. I feel like the worst thing that the Republicans did to stab themselves in the brain was when McCain chose Sarah Palin as the nominee. Like, to me, that was the beginning of the end. And I think that in retrospect, Clint's freak out on the chair at the Republican convention was a further step towards the madness that led us to Donald Trump as their nominee.
I don't disagree with a word of what you said. I think it's also funny that who would be up in the batting order of good conservative, but Mitt Romney himself later. Romney became the Ted Lasso that liberals could say, look at this guy, he's not openly calling for race war at this time, so he's our new best friend. It's funny that you mentioned also that he was a big, we need a businessman, an office guy, because he, of course, opted to endorse Michael Bloomberg for president over Donald Trump, perhaps the most likable man in America. Do you guys want him up there, by the way? Well, you can have him if you do. Bloomberg,
no, thank
we'll
you.
Give him to you.
We gave you Ted Cruz, and we're not taking him back.
Yeah. Ted Cruz, by the way, a favorite 2016 candidate of James Woods, but we'll get to him in a moment. Ian, had you seen this movie before?
I'd seen it barely, maybe a year ago. I think you and I texted about it. This was, for me, part of the run-up for us creating our testament to our personal madness, this podcast.
Yes. Our personal San Quentin.
Exactly. Yeah. I enjoyed it quite a bit. I would not say it's among my favorite, but I understand. First of all, I think you guys are both kind of touching on the same ABC Sunday night movie quality of this. It feels close to home, feels comfortable, even when it's messy. I think it's kind of charming, and I enjoyed it quite a bit. So I'm happy to talk about it. I also think it's not just in its question of the gigantic classic ethical debate over the death penalty, but even in finer points of like journalistic responsibility and how journalists tend to also just be freaks with a lot of personal failures in their lives. And I think it's honest to say that at the same time you're talking about their potential heroism in very, very specific contexts. So yeah, it's good.
Yeah, I mean, Roger Ebert in his review, which was one of the this film received fairly mixed reception, but I love to receive reception. But Ebert was a fan of the film and referred to what other critics called a sort of rushed, improbable conclusion as a accurate depiction of what he found to be. I believe he described the journalistic hunt as with some kind of orgasm metaphor, which was characteristically
speeding towards a climax.
Ebertian. Yeah. Let's get into the plot of the film a little bit. So, well, first of all, this originates, Jesse, as you mentioned, this was, I believe, a pre-publication option by Clint's friend and skiing buddy, Richard D. Zanuck. Richard Zanuck and his wife, Lily. By the way, he married two different women named Lily, Lili. Very strange thing to do.
Well, you don't have to worry about calling her by the other wife's name when you do that.
Exactly.
Relax
yes.
into
This is Lily F. Zanuck. So Richard Zanuck, of course, had with his producing partner, what's his first name? David Brown. Yes, they had produced Jaws, which was a good idea on their part. And then he had also executive produced The Eiger Sanction way back in '75, but they were buds from
Not
the
quite
Slopes.
a good of an idea.
Yeah, this is a great Wikipedia sentence I'd like to just read verbatim. On September 23rd, 1978, Zanuck married his third wife, Lily Feeney, a former World Bank employee and Carnation Company office manager, who helped him raise his sons from his second marriage and would co-produce some of his most memorable films, including Cocoon, Driving Miss Daisy, and Reign of Fire. Just a classic triple feature, if ever there was one. Reign of Fire kind of good, though.
Rain of Fire is kind of good.
It is hot.
Well, this is how depressing the state of the art is, that, something like Reign of Fire seemed like completely disposable cinema in 2002. And now you look at it and it feels like classical Hollywood filmmaking.
Right. If Reign of Fire came, it's one of those, if Reign of Fire came out now, film Twitter wouldn't shut up about it for a month.
Yeah. Lily Finney Zanuck also directed that movie called Rush. She had this weird vanity directing career.
The Hemsworth film?
No.
That's Ron Howard.
Oh, yeah.
With Jason Patrick and Jennifer Jason Leigh. It was a film about undercover cops who are also struggling with heroin addiction. And,
right. Yeah.
But she directed it, and everyone was like, "What the hell?" Like, who is this person? She's the wife of Richard Zanuck, and now she's a filmmaker. Right. So people were a little critical about that. I guess there's an echo here too, and since we're talking about Clint, with Sandra Locke's directing career that was happening while they were an item.
Yeah, I was going to say Rush came out a year after Impulse, and it seems like a sort of an Impulse-esque. Oh my God, Eric Clapton did the score, and Tears in Heaven
was
like
from
on the
that
soundtrack.
Movie. Yeah,
that's insane.
I can't remember if it was Oscar nominated, but it was from that soundtrack. Yeah,
interesting.
It's a swing and a miss though for me.
Yeah, I had not seen Rush, but I will be firing it up and probably turning it off. So they optioned the book, and then Clint is, I think, starting to work on another favorite of mine, Bloodwork, the airport novel adaptation of the Michael Connelly book, and that is on the back burner, and he ends up doing True Crime first. So the novel I picked up, started reading a little bit, read about Andrew Klavan, and decided that I would do something else with my time. But the book has two very key differences from the film. It is set in St. Louis rather than Clint's native Oakland. And crucially, the death row inmate in the book is white, which changes the entire thing. I think it's like we were talking about this on our A Perfect World episode, but in the original script for that film, Clint's character has no prior relationship to Costner's character, which is like so thematically crucial in here. I feel like the movie is without the component of Frank Beecham character's blackness. I feel like the film is just, I don't know, Primal Fear or something. It's just which is a perfectly enjoyable movie, but it doesn't have nearly the thematic resonance. And according to some IMDb trivia guy, Clint was the shot caller on changing the race of the prisoner character, although I couldn't corroborate that anywhere, so who knows?
Yeah, we sometimes accuse him of dancing around race, but I gotta give it up to Clint. He seems like a guy who would recognize the importance of saying, hey, the majority of the time that these false accusations happen, it is because of cross-racial identification and is related to larger issues in society. Not just Andrew Klavan's kind of personal...
Enemy of the show, larger issues in society.
Yeah.
Did either of you guys see the documentary called Murder on a Sunday Morning?
No, I don't know about this.
I have
Very
not
good.
seen
It won the Oscar. It was made by two French filmmakers, but they did a film about a black kid who was convicted. He was certainly arrested and charged with murder of this white tourist. He was a black teenager who was basically picked up off the street and basically browbeaten into confessing to a murder. And he got a court-appointed lawyer who is a little bit like Clint in this movie, that his nose was telling him that this was not the kid who did it, and that it was a rush to judgment in a very racist part of the United States where being black is you're halfway there to being convicted as long as you're a black person that gets arrested. Nothing was adding up for him. And not only did he get this kid off, he, after the case was over, went and found the guy who did it.
Oh, shit.
It's an incredible, and it's a true story. It's a documentary. But yeah, like,
fascinating.
most people don't get a court-appointed lawyer who cares that much.
Right.
But
yeah, usually you get what Clint calls a 12-year-old legal aid guy or something.
Yeah.
And this other guy, by the way, the hero of this movie is no idea of a hero. He's got like terrible complexion. He's chain smoking all the time. He is not your poster boy for heroism. But he also, the very fact that this guy managed to get this kid not only off the case, but completely exonerated and catch the real killer gives you an idea of just how incredibly unfair it is in the justice system in the United States. And I think that Clint gets points for me when I read that, he adapted this crime novel from a conservative guy and complicated whatever the point the guy's trying to make is by reminding the audience that in general, the general population in prison are black, and most of the people that get executed are black. And the idea of the witnesses being sort of motivated by their own advantages in society, like, I saw a black guy covered in blood, that's good enough for me. It was interesting for Clint to mention that stuff. But Clint's not perfect either, because he's also got the pussy on toast guy in this movie. And Clint has many films Clint has many films with the stereotypical black guy who, like in Sudden Impact and in Dirty Harry, where the blackness of the guy that he's about to shoot is really gross. Like Clint, he tries to have it both ways. And maybe that's might be why I prefer my conservatives who try to have it both ways than the ones who are one or the other, like they're either super right wing or super right wing. But the ones who go, well, but black people are treated badly in the United States, that's a big step forward for me.
Ian, you were going to say something, I think.
Oh, I was just going to a lot was made both at the time this film came out and I think on Letterboxd contemporarily about how ridiculous it is that somebody could unravel a 6-year appeal process court case in 14 hours?
6 hours.
But in fact, these cases are often so flimsy and based on, you sort of gestured towards this, Jesse, the famously unreliable eyewitness testimony, which I want to talk about a little bit later, or like forensic hair analysis, something that's largely proven to be a crock of shit.
Yeah.
That in fact, I think you very reasonably, at least, it's not a huge leap talking about Hollywood adaptations or poetic license to say that you could uncover some massive mistakes on the part of like a DA or a jury or something in a single day. I actually believe this.
He's doing it while distracted on the phone even.
Yeah.
Let's get into the plot just a little bit. So this, as we have danced around, this film concerns investigative reporter Steve Everett, played by Clint Eastwood, who is a recovering alcoholic or semi-recovering alcoholic who, after heavily flirting with the West Wing's Mary McCormick as a young hotshot reporter, she drives drunk around Dead Man's Curve. They should really stop naming parts of roads Dead Man's Curve. I think it's a bad look. She's killed in a car accident, and he is assigned on his day off. He is assigned to her death row interview, her like execution day interview and execution witnessing sidebar. They keep mentioning this is a sidebar, and I think overall this film is heavily, as many Clint Eastwood films are, it's heavily critical of institutions, including, I mean, nobody's spared here. The criminal justice system, the media, the clergy, everyone is a schmuck in this movie, or short-sighted, or cruel, or unfeeling in some way. Yeah, self-interested. Notably, so I Googled Clint Eastwood death penalty to see if the man had made any direct statements about it. And he did give one statement to Esquire magazine in the famous interview that I have mentioned on the show before. Was like basically my first introduction to Clint Eastwood, who I'd heard of as a guy, and I liked the Gorillaz song, and otherwise I didn't know anything about him. And he says in this interview, of death row inmates, there's not a guy in the world that wouldn't want to drop the hammer on them. But in our society, you have certain people trying to analyze what we give them for lethal injection. What's the difference? Battery acid would be fine. And this is in 2012, which to me, you know, it's a disgusting thing to say, but it also kind of feels like macho posturing or something. Like, because this movie it's hard to imagine a more anti-death penalty narrative film. I mean, beyond like documentaries, as you say, Jesse, or Into the Abyss, the Werner Herzog documentary comes to mind as well.
Paradise
but like,
Lost.
This entire movie is an argument against the death penalty for so many reasons, for the fact of shoddy investigations, the fact of this kind of bloodthirst that comes up when you get these high profile cases of black on white crime or alleged black on white crime, because the majority of homicides are not of white women, but are of black men by any demographic group. And I mean, it's hard to imagine somebody watching, for example, the green crayon scene in this film and come away from it wanting anyone to be put to death by the state. I mean, I think that's just devastating. I think the performances in this film are just like remarkable.
Well, I want to just interject there that, you know, I think Clint's main, he might be in favor of the death penalty, but strongly against innocent people being put to death.
Right. Yeah.
Very brave stance.
Which is a very lib position to take.
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, you joke, but it is one of the most bulletproof criticisms of the death penalty, which is if there is one person that you execute incorrectly, then maybe you should not be executing anybody, because there's some things you can't take back. I mean, admittedly, that's also an argument against treating prisoners like garbage, because when you figure out after 30 years that somebody was incorrectly convicted, then you not only have to say, I stole 30 years of your life, but I put you in this place where you were tortured effectively for the extent of that time.
And I agree with you. The very fact that there are many examples of people who were either let out of death row because new evidence came to light, or they were executed and then new evidence came to light, that you can't be doing it, because it presumes that the American legal system is working properly and the American policing system is working properly, and it isn't.
Yes.
So you can't have a death penalty attached to it.
Yeah, I read about a case very recently, one of the people executed in the United States in the last few years, where he had probably committed homicide and he had killed a cop. I'm not going to make any jokes about that, in fact, but I am going to say that he killed a cop because he was being pursued in a high-speed chase where he was incorrectly identified as the suspect in an unrelated robbery. And then he ended up killing the cop because they got into a fight. And then, like you're saying, Jesse, even before you get to questions of you know, who should be killed, we be killing anybody, the people involved in pursuing these cases are like doing make work for the death penalty. They are creating situations where people are going to end up being executed, where if they had just left this guy alone, he likely would not have killed anybody. So
Yeah, and you see in American culture now, like a few months ago, there was that guy, that like ex-Marine or whatever he was, who murdered a guy on the subway for being a noisemaker. Like,
Yes.
you
Yeah.
know, and the a lot of people were saying that, this guy could have saved a lot of people and stuff like that. Like, this extrajudicial approval of the death penalty is yet another reason why death penalty culture has to be eradicated.
I agree
Yep.
wholeheartedly. I think it's also it's pointedly in this film, even the actual homicide is accidental. The gun goes off while the real killer is not, or the real armed robber is not looking. It's very obviously a mistake, and he immediately regrets it and freaks out. He's also mentioned to be dealing with substance abuse. He's seems to be he's very much acting like he is just looking for money, presumably to get a fix. Like he's at the mercy of forces beyond his own control. So as much as Clint clearly is like against innocent people being killed, the film itself does feel like it is against the death penalty entirely. And we also get this very disturbing and upsetting sort of rapport that Frank Beecham and the warden and his personal last day stenographer have. They're all very friendly and respectful with one another, and you get the sense that, why don't you just not do this? Like, everyone is acting like there's a number of mentions of just doing our jobs and removing their own culpability, their own personal responsibility, to use a conservative watch phrase. But they all seem to hate that they have to do this, and yet they do it anyway. There's even that mention of the scrambled circuits on like the buttons that the executioners push so that they don't know who actually did the deed. And like, once you get into electrical engineer to like rig up a special guilt remover box, like, why don't you just think of something else to do? You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. One of my issues with, well, let me put it this way. So Clint, at once, one thing that I admire about true crime and its depiction of the process of the death penalty is that so much of the movie is given over to the process of somebody's last day. That you see that there's some kind of a rapport that has built up between the prisoner and the warden and the clergyman and the stenographer. Like, they all know that they have this difficult job to do. Clint is not going so far as to say the system is broken. There's no, I don't think anybody's taken to the woodshed for hounding this innocent man.
Right.
Like, the facts finally come to light. But I don't think Clint is saying the system is engineered to kill black people. It's not like a harder critique of the punishment, the crime and punishment system of the United States. Clint's not going to go that far.
I agree, but there are hints at it that are not present in other Clint films, like when Beecham mentions like the reason that he ran, because he knows he's a black man with blood all over him, and a white man has just walked into the gas station, and he kind of knows the score here. He also has a previous criminal record and just does the math, and it's notable that this is even goes mentioned because previous films like Bird and Unforgiven don't have nearly they have black characters, but they don't have nearly the sort of even just depiction of racial prejudice in them.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's also notable here that he recasts Diane Venora as his own wife after she plays Chan Parker, because, famously, at least on this show, famously in the run up to that film, or in the promotion of that film, he said something about how he's always felt like a black man in a white man's body, which is not
the
good
danger
to say,
of being a
that.
white jazz fan as you start saying
exactly
like that.
From Oakland, or specifically from a special white enclave within Oakland called Piedmont.
Mm-hmm.
And at this point, by the way, he's also already married to Dina Ruiz, his, I think, second wife.
Yeah, she's got a cameo in this movie.
She does, and as does
his
Frances
previous lady,
Fisher.
Frances Fisher.
And daughter with Frances Fisher, Francesca Eastwood.
Yeah, she shows up here with just a extremely natural hair color. She looks very crazy in this movie with the dyed red hair.
Yeah, it's like Ronald McDonald levels of red.
Lovely.
I just wanted to add that I think Bernard Hill, as I'm going to assume it's pronounced,
Yes.
love this British affect. King Theoden, for those just joining us.
Absolutely.
He, to me, is like the perfect representation of this. I think I agree with you, Jesse. I don't know that the film wants us to be that hard on him, but I actually think as a text, it does a wonderful job of condemning this exact type of liberal or like centrist type person who is participating in a very ugly system, but believes they're maybe doing the best they can to like minimize the harm, but effectively decides that they are without any power to change it, right? That seems to be his attitude, that look, we have to do this horrible thing. I don't like to see these people die. We make it as convenient as possible for the governor to step in, but ultimately
make sure the lines are open.
Right. Yeah.
But that's as far as he goes. And he also, like, we see him not even show the courage to tell his subordinates to stop making jokes about the guy, about this fucking job that they have. Like,
I mean, the COs are just out and out nasty. They're fully pilled on being officers of a correctional facility who just assume everybody is guilty. And as one of them says, they lie. That's what convicts do.
Yeah.
And as you gestured to earlier, Jake, I think Michael McKean's character is also great. These are the touches that I think elevate this film to something special. He's just so abhorrent in his self-promotion.
Right.
I was actually, he was kind of like the MVP of this movie, because I was like, wait a minute, that's Michael McKean. And then it turned out to be a very, very lacerating portrayal of that sort of sanctimoniousness. The role of the clergy in the executions. Like, you know, you would think that they would also be opposed to the death penalty in terms of an eye for an eye and all that. But this guy is so gross because he wants to basically manufacture a feel-good story out of this guy's execution. And he's giving him a chance and doing that sort of the kindly priest bullshit. Like, come on, son, this is your chance for redemption. And I thought it was a very nice touch that we see how obnoxious this guy is and how he's basically not wanted. And he lets that sanctimoniousness turns into like, projected rage at this guy, like telling him that he's basically condemned to burn in hell. And then at the end of the movie, we discover that he goes out there and says that the guy confessed.
Right.
Which is like a perfect example of that sort of sanctimoniousness.
Right. And this is like the one piece of power that Frank Beecham still has, is that he can maintain his innocence. Like basically the only freedom he still has in his entire life. And McKean robs him of this in what I assume is like a self-aggrandizing or like a self-promotion gamble, where he wants to be the guy who gets this confession and not Beecham's preferred priest, who, this is, to me, reads as another subtle way that the film shows how the prison system is just like not even designed to acknowledge the humanity of the many Black people who are incarcerated in it, because it's giving them some fucking Irish Catholic priest guy, and that's not who they're looking for. By the way, the Reverend is played by Reverend Cecil Williams of Glide Memorial Church, who's credited as himself. Ian, you've mentioned Glide Memorial on the show previously.
Yes, perhaps a rare actual hero in a Clint Eastwood film, a guy who has fought for Black rights in the community, for HIV/AIDS support, for homeless resources, and I think basically as revolutionary as you can get and still be a part of a massive church in a major urban center.
And just to interject one more little thing is that the other thing that I liked about this story is that the media are also part of the problem, in the sense that there's a running theme throughout the show where we are seeing the live wall-to-wall coverage of the impending execution and the role that the media has to play. The Oakland Tribune newspaper wants a feel-good story about this condemned man, like a little human interest story, as they call it. The reporter, the young reporter who dies in the first 10 minutes of the movie, thinks that something's up. And Clint, whose whole career is, despite being an alcoholic, is based on something doesn't add up. Like, that's what he's so proud of about himself. Gets the gig to uncover the story. I mean, it's ludicrous at how easily he manages to uncover that a terrible miscarriage of justice has happened here. But later on in Clint's career is the movie Richard Jewell, which is very, very scabrous about the evil role that the media plays in defining somebody as guilty. the media in this situation, it's troubling for the whole system when the media starts to identify the innocence of someone. Like, that's not why he's there, but he makes it the reason why he's there, and he succeeds. And 20 years later, Clint will make a movie about how horrible the media is and how that in fact their sort of personal grievances about the situation can actually help to make an innocent man a condemned person.
Specifically in that film, of course, the evil women are behind the nasty coverage. I do love all of the newspaper office stuff in this movie. By the way, the Oakland Tribune, of course, now has been roped into the East Bay Area Times by something called Alden Capital. It's been combined and the newsroom slashed over and over again, of course. But we've got this terrific duo of Denis Leary as Bob Findley, who's the editor, and then James Woods as Alan Mann, who is he the owner, or is he
he's the main editor of the paper.
The main editor.
Yeah,
okay.
The other guy's the owner.
He's the J. Jonah Jameson of the Oakland Tribune.
Yes.
And he is such a wonderfully acid, and I mean, this is what is so great about James Woods. Is the tragedy of James Woods is that he can do this so beautifully, and then
he is this person in real life.
Although he's mad at Elon right now because he took away the block feature, and James Woods, of course, is constantly being targeted by trolls whom he's suing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking about how crazy it is that we have this actor who also almost stopped 9/11, and here he is just in a Clint Eastwood film. You know?
Yeah, he saw some suspicious guys on a plane and told the FBI about him. By the way, Jesse, thank you so much in advance for agreeing to stay on for 3 more hours while we all do a special bonus episode on the 2003 USA Network TV movie Rudy, the Rudy Giuliani story, starring James Woods as Rudy Giuliani.
That's around the time where we lost James Woods forever.
Yeah,
was around then.
Yeah,
exactly. He died. He died in 9/11.
Yeah, he in a certain way he did die in 9/11, didn't he?
He has a huge 1999. By the way, he's in The Virgin Suicides.
He's great in it.
And The General's Daughter.
Yeah.
And
he's
Any Given Sunday.
Too. Yeah.
And Play It to the Bone. And this movie, all in 99. He's great.
No, I love James Woods, and that's the heartbreaking experience for the last few years. You know, in fact, I never go after James Woods on Twitter because I don't want to be blocked by him. I don't follow him.
You want to see the post.
But you know, I hold him in such high esteem as an actor. I'm disappointed to hear what he thinks about things these days. Right now, he's going through this weird hero arc that I wonder where it's going to go. Where during the announcement of the SAG after strikes, he came forward and said that he supports the strike and he's pro-union. And he also mentioned that he's one of the executive producers of Oppenheimer. So he said that he was allowed to talk about Oppenheimer as a member of the Producers Guild who are not on strike. And it's a movie that has a somewhat sympathetic portrayal of communist members in the scientific community. Like, he did not impose any of his personal feelings on the Red Scare. I don't. You would think that James Woods would be a anti-communist, but maybe I'm wondering whether he's on his way back. Like, he's decided, you know what? If I tone it back a little bit, maybe I can start being an actor again, and that would be wonderful because he's always been good. Is he even acting anymore? It feels to me like he's tweeting and car collecting.
He's of course still keeping up the character of Hades in the many Kingdom Hearts sequels. Most of his IMDb credits of late are just various Kingdom Hearts voiceover work.
Iconic portrayal.
And he's also, of course, he's great in White House Down as the evil vice president who is behind. He's, I guess, playing a sort of a Joe Biden figure in that film, but he's like deep state taking over the White House.
But he's not getting in on the sort of Daily Wire gravy train, you know, like when they inevitably make their Atlas Shrugged movie.
Well, unfortunately, Isaiah Washington arc here.
We do have to talk about that.
I would love to talk about this. So Isaiah Washington, who I think is absolutely astounding in this movie. I think he is so wonderful in this.
Yes.
And at playing fear and nobility. A lot of the reviews at the time called him sort of impossibly noble, but I do think these little moments, like when he gets mad at Michael McKean and sort of loses his cool a little bit, are the kinds of things that keep him from being like just a totally unrecognizable, like saintly person. He's trying to be a godly man. He's doing his best for his daughter and to try to, he's trying to hold it together, but he's not entirely successful because he's a human being. So he's great in this. He's in a bunch of Spike Lee movies before this. Basically, the run of Spike that I've seen the least of. So he's in Crooklyn and Clockers and Girl 6 and Get on the Bus. He's in Love Jones and Dead Presidents and Bulworth and Out of Sight, all prior to this.
He was one of the bad guys in Exit Wounds, which was filmed in
Yes.
Toronto. He's very funny in it as the villain. He's sort of the Kaiser Sose in that film where we discover
That's the Steven Seagal DMX movie?
Yeah, where he's the
What a
cop who
sentence.
seems like the only good cop on the precinct, and it turns out that in fact he's the evil cop.
I'm shocked. And then, of course, he was on Grey's Anatomy. And in a conversation with Patrick Dempsey, he referred to then not out cast member T.R. Knight using the F slur, the special one for gay people. And this was a big kerfuffle. He didn't respond to it great. He didn't like deal with it that well. He like went on Ellen and tried to be funny about it, and this eventually led to his being written off the show. And I think, like a number of people who have been sort of removed from their jobs in Hollywood for being hateful psychos, he decided that he was going to turn right. And so he did this fairly gradually, first by endorsing Jill Stein in 2016. And then he was a big supporter of the #WalkAway movement, which it was a pretty clearly astroturfed movement, I'm doing scare quotes, of liberals who were supposedly leaving the Democratic Party, many of whom turned out to be free images from Shutterstock.com.
Yeah. Also, I believe involved in the January 6th.
Yep.
Yeah.
Brandon Straka, the founder and former aspiring actor, who's now, I think, we could say maybe a working actor in a certain way, he went ahead and went to the Capitol on January 6th. FBI picked him up in Nebraska or something. Now, Isaiah Washington played a friend of the show in the film Blue Caprice, John Allen Muhammad,
Yes.
the DC sniper. Not a friend of the show.
Not half bad if you've seen it.
Yeah, I was going to ask if either of you had seen the movie Blue Caprice.
It's not half bad, actually.
Yeah, I'm excited to check it out. And of course, in 2022, he made his debut as a writer-director with the film Corsicana, in which he plays Bass Reeves, a real-life former slave who became one of the first black deputy U.S. Marshals. This is like exactly the kind of thing that you would expect a black Republican in 2022 to be doing. It also stars Stacey Dash. Again, 2022 Stacey Dash is in this movie.
Again, I mean, this is that pipeline of failed entertainers who become right-wing, and you can also tag that on to the guy who wrote the book that this is based on, who is also a crank on the Daily Wire now.
And Ben Shapiro, who was a failed screenwriter. Same with, was Tucker Carlson? There was another one of those guys that was a failed screenwriter. There's a lot of like, liberal Hollywood doesn't like me, so I guess I'm going to be their sworn enemy now.
But we got to give a shout out to Clint, because Clint could have gone this route as well.
Absolutely.
But Clint has made movies that liberals and conservatives can admire, and
exactly.
Whenever I say anything positive about Clint on Twitter, I get the usual, complaints. Somebody reminds me of the chair incident as if I don't remember it.
Yeah.
And things like that. But it's like,
You
count your lucky stars that you've got somebody like Clint who actually isn't up for being used that way. Like, pointedly, Clint did not become a Trump guy.
Right.
And in fact, when they were trying to get him to endorse him in the 2020 election, Clint stayed on the sidelines about it. He didn't say anything very bad about Trump, but he certainly didn't come to his rescue.
He seems to say only what he believes, which it can be selective at times, but I will give him credit for that.
I imagine it would be hard for him to fully condemn someone who's done so much for this great sport of golf, as Donald Trump has. We also have Lisa Gay Hamilton as Bonnie Beecham, the wife of Frank, who is, listeners may have noticed her in 12 Monkeys or Jackie Brown or Jonathan Demme's Beloved before this. She also plays Condoleezza Rice in Vice. And do you know who she's married to? No. Since 2009, she's been married to Robin D.G. Kelly.
Whoa. Okay.
Yeah.
All
so
right.
She's like straight up cool.
Well, she's, I thought, very good in this as kind of grieving and upset, but not in a like histrionic way. She's to me, a very real portrayal of somebody trying to control their emotions in a circumstance. And like most of the film, we see her in her last visit, Frank Beecham, and she is like crying despite not wanting to be crying because it's ruining their time together.
Yeah.
I enjoyed her portrayal.
We got to give it a shout out to Clint Eastwood because there's a built-in suspense in the concept of this movie. The very conceit of this film is a race against time. And, you're willing to forgive the happenstance and the mounting coincidences that are very convenient because the film is so well acted that it's fine. Like that scene in the prison where his little girl is crying because the green crayon is missing and she can't do the greener pastures. Like that's eyeball roll kind of stuff in terms of being on the nose, but the performances are so strong that the little girl's anguish about this, and she's not quite old enough to understand what's happening, and the father is basically finds himself in this situation where he has to say goodbye to her even if she doesn't understand that this is forever, and that she and I thought it was very nice touch for Clint when the little girl finally is escorted out of the room, that they hold on the difficulty of having to say this to your child and to make us see that. I thought was, even though it's a little much and it's a little too much, it's fine because it's so well done. And I think that's one of the reasons why I have so much more time for Clint as a filmmaker, is even if he's going to be on the nose, it's going to work.
I couldn't believe that Green Mile came out the same year because I was, kind of mentally comparing the aesthetics of the two throughout the film. I think you're right, Jesse, that even Clint's anti-aesthetics that sometimes can be a little over the top or not focused on the right elements or a little bit distracted because they're done in such a rushed way. I thought they came off as kind of like a cinema verite. It reminded me a little bit of how, like you're saying, Into the Abyss style documentaries look. I mean, there's a lot of handheld in here. There's like a little bit of shaking when they're doing the prison interview and stuff. And I think that also helps for me undercut what you're saying, where these moments that could easily be extremely saccharine or unnecessarily focused on elements that we already understand as an audience why they're emotional, they end up just kind of like shifting onto little details which are much more fascinating and realistic.
Yeah, I think also the way that Jack and Green shoots the interactions between or like across bars. He notably, like, the bars are obscuring a lot of their faces in a way that I think is very effective and sort of frustrating for the viewer, but in a way that I think is thematically consistent with the rest of the movie. Like, you literally want this guy to get out from behind bars so you can see him better. Like, you can see his face better. I think San Quentin looks appropriately awful. And, Ian, I'm sure you've had this experience. Jesse, I don't know if you've driven from Los Angeles to San Francisco, but you just pass by San Quentin on the side of the road in like what is otherwise a quite picturesque part of the Bay Area, and it's the place is beautiful except for this fucking prison that's ruining the view essentially.
Yeah.
Same with Alcatraz, which is now the tourist attraction. And notably, Clint escaped from another Bay Area prison.
That's true.
In an earlier film.
Something that never fails to make me mad when I visit Baltimore, where I have in-laws. You have to take a freeway basically to get from downtown Baltimore up to where the white people live. And you have to pass this gigantic prison that's like right downtown. And there's a subway station at the prison. Like, I've never heard of that before. Like, when people finally get out of jail, if they get out of jail, they have to go to the subway.
Yeah.
And or worse, when you have to go visit your husband who's in prison, you have to get out at the prison subway station. The sort of the specter of punishment and the taunting of civilization that you have to live. Here's the jail that you never want to go to, and if you're in jail, here's the city that you're not allowed to look at except outside your prison window. It's just so punitive. And as a Canadian, we have to sit there and listen to Americans talk about how free they are, but we don't have experiences like that here. You have to travel to go find the jail. There was a jail in downtown Toronto that no longer operates. So in Toronto, we don't have that sort of like crime and punishment vibe that America has, where,
Well, you're welcome to come soak up as much as you'd like whenever. We'd love to have you here in Jail Central. There's there's like a skyscraper jail in downtown Los Angeles. Like it's no longer in use as a jail, but there's this bizarre building where the top of it looks like sort of a government building that someone put a bad approximation of the Parthenon on top of it and covered it in bars, because it used to be like the top 5 floors of this building were a jail. Very bizarre. But I think this it's notable that the very careful and heroic fatherhood shown by Isaiah Washington's character is contrasted with the real shitty fatherhood shown by Ev, because of course he has a daughter in the film played by his own daughter, Francesca Eastwood, who's like 5 or 6 at this point. And it's funny because I found myself thinking, like, it's preposterous that this character is supposed to have a daughter this young. And then I was like, wait, no, he literally did. And in fact, at this point, I believe already had a younger child with Dina, Morgan Eastwood. Francesca is very cute in the movie. Unclear to me. Do you guys think she knows that she's in a movie?
I don't know. She calls Clint Eastwood little daddy, which is just a potent real childism. Yeah, it's great. Yeah. I almost want to complain about how much Steve Everett home life stuff we get, because it sometimes feels meandering, but it's so good. And so we talked about Clint acknowledging his failures without ever improving on them in real life, but it does it so effectively here. He just seems like such a shitty husband. We've mentioned Diane Rona's wonderful monologue that she gives about how she's just tired and can't do it anymore. And I couldn't help but assume that Clint has received similar speeches several times in his life.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Which is why he could so correctly portray himself, like kind of stone-facedly offering that he will try to improve. I don't know. It works kind of despite itself as an artistic choice to do so much of this.
I know we're about to talk about the Speed Zoo scene, but I do want to wind it back a little bit to talk about Clint as the sex god, because I think that it's something that I know why we haven't wanted to talk about it, because it's very difficult to have to talk about shirtless Clint, 70-year-old Clint.
He looks the same shirtless in this as he does in like Any Which Way You Can. It is remarkable how well preserved he is.
I think he's fading a little, but it is.
Well, his face has aged so much more than his body has. At least to this point. Obviously his body now is leathery, but in this film, he's of course there's the wonderful line that James Woods says, stop fucking Bob's wife, he doesn't like it. And Ian, I think as a special episode, you and I might have to do a dramatic reading of that whole scene between James Woods and Clint. Maybe we can switch off like that Frankenstein production. But yeah, he's stooping this woman. The actress's name is Layla Robbins, who I recognize as the wife from Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, which is a film that I fucking despise. I really hate that film, and I think she's the worst. She is in the worst part of it, where all of a sudden the tone shifts dramatically, and it's like she's just in a totally different movie about a woman who misses her husband. But Clint is, of course, bedding her, and also almost very successfully sleeping with the 23-year-old Michelle Ziegler at the beginning of the film, until she has the misfortune to die in a car crash. But
yeah, this is clumsy, and I will say I watched this with my lovely podcast girlfriend, and she was incredulous throughout about watching Clint Eastwood. Thank you. Yeah.
Nice going.
She was saying, I can't believe that he would portray himself this way. And I said, well, you got to give him credit for being honest, because I'm pretty sure that is how he lives his life. But I think the Michelle Ziegler character, again, this is like both a pussy on toast, total misstep, kind of tone deaf thing for me. But then also having a 23-year-old person accidentally die, and then having that kind of come up intermittently throughout the film, I also think is maybe like a genius note about the arbitrary nature of death, and how we're like also imposing a death penalty in a world where people already die accidentally. And that makes it seem even crueler, right? Why accelerate something in such a contingent and random existence?
Well, and same with the actual guy who shot Amy Wilson, right? He's been in his grave for 3 years now, because he was stabbed in the park. Like this cycle of violence that if that's not a death penalty after a life of misery at the hands of heroin. Like, it's not like he was having a great
the
time.
damage to your own psyche if you did kill somebody and not face any punishment for it,
Right.
Like,
yeah.
Yeah, it's true. But back to Clint as the sex god.
Yes.
Yes, please. Yeah.
This is that weird, there was this weird diptych where Clint, in the span of about 3 or 4 years, had shirtless scenes in True Crime, and then a couple of years later in Blood Work, where we're supposed to think that a man in his 70s is still pulling in the girls.
Well, in that one, it's at least a much closer to an age-appropriate
Yes, that's true.
partner.
But God bless Clint, because in The Mule, he has a threesome, and then later in the movie, he has another threesome. And, this the fact that Clint will not let go of the idea of him as irresistible to women. Even in Cry Macho, the ladies are all in love with Clint, but, he's 92.
Do we think, I don't mean to besmirch the good name of one of our finest performers, and of course one of Charlie's Angels, but do we think that Clint and Lucy Liu had a romance?
I thought they had great chemistry.
Yeah.
First of all, I told you guys already that I saw the movie a year ago, and I was still shocked to see Lucy Liu at the end.
She's
of this
on
film.
Ally McBeal at this point when the movie comes out.
She had a big enough career. It made me wonder how long has this movie been on a shelf. If Lucy Liu is on Ally McBeal, and next year will be in Charlie's Angels, gets the toy shop girl. Doesn't even get a name in the credits. She's toy shop girl.
Well, at least she's not Pussy Man. That's Eric King is credited as Pussy Man in the credits.
Is it Pussy Man / Santa Claus at the end or no?
He doesn't even get that dignity.
Yeah.
But are we ready to talk about Speed Zoo?
Not quite, because I have one more thing to say.
Please.
And the other strange thing about the scene where he's with the editor's wife is that she's lounging around in the bed in nude pantyhose, and you don't usually see a woman. She's sort of like, we can see up her nightgown, and she's wearing nude pantyhose along with Clint. Like, it suggests a sort of a comfortable intimacy between the two. But I was like, Clint, what are you doing? You're not supposed to put the camera there.
Very
very sleazy,
disturbing, sleazy. Exactly.
The fact that she only has one scene in the whole movie, and that's the scene, is just so strange. And Clint also cucking Denis Leary, I appreciate, because I'm not a fan of Denis Leary.
Yeah, me either.
He's kind of underplaying it in this film.
I think he's supposed to be a little bit of a nice guy put in a bad situation. I don't know. We're supposed to totally like him, but yes, Denis Leary, famous plagiarist and just kind of piece of shit in real life.
Did you hear the amazing Bill Hicks burn about Denis Leary?
I do know
what
this line.
Please share.
Well, Bill Hicks, he wound up dying of pancreatic cancer. And when they asked him about his cancer, he said, well, I got cancer to see if Denis Leary would get it too.
I'm familiar with a different line. That's great. But after it was discovered that Denis Leary had probably stolen a bunch of his bits, some newspaper asked Bill Hicks about it. And he said, actually, I stole them from Denis Leary. And just to throw people off further, I added punchlines and did them a year before he did.
Pretty good.
Put this guy in his grave.
Pretty good.
Yep.
So, for the record, I'd like to enter in a tweet. This is from August the 26th, 2020, almost 3 years ago, by one at Jesse Hawken. The Speed Zoo scene. This, by the way, this was brought to my attention by Aaron from Hit Factory, friend of the show. The Speed Zoo scene is Clint acknowledging his following in France, a clear reference to the Louvre scene in Godard's Band Apart, muting all replies as I am 100% correct, which you are.
You know what, though? This is a common joke amongst friends of mine. I think Nick Pinkerton has also made this observation. Sure. But in my group of Clint fans, the late style Clint crew, we've joked about how Clint was paying tribute to Godard, who, by the way, I believe that when Clint won the Arts and Letters Award from the French government, I do believe Godard introduced
César
it.
d'Honneur, and I have the clip here. Yes. So Godard and Clint both get the honorary César Award the same night, which is, I think, 97, something like that. And Godard hands it to him. He's clearly unmiked. I'll play the clip for you now. I hope you guys can hear this.
Merci. Merci beaucoup. Maestro.
A great pleasure, Mr. Honky Tonk Man, to give you that. And good luck. And good courage. And be yourself.
Thank you, Jean-Luc. Thank you.
So, first of all,
yeah,
he says, my great pleasure to give you that, Mr. Honky Tonk Man.
Yes, that's what I loved.
Yeah.
And also, he seems, I mean, I haven't seen...
Nervous.
Admittedly, yeah, I haven't watched a lot of footage of Jean-Luc Godard, like, on stage, but he seems so nervous. He's also speaking English, but I do love that Clint calls him Maestro, and then Jean-Luc as if they're, like, buddies. Of course, Godard dedicates The Detective to Clint Eastwood, among others.
Also famous one-taker, Jean-Luc Godard. I mean, just to give you a sense of how different your films can come out between these two gentlemen.
Yeah, of course, famous. They're both famous Maoists.
And also worth mentioning that the 1517 to Paris is, to my knowledge, the only movie about people who won the Legion of Honor Award, directed by a man who also won the Legion of Honor Award.
Oh,
holy shit! All right, well, we're gonna have to fact check you on that, but I do believe you. So Clint has to he's supposed to take his daughter to the zoo, and he's forgotten about it. He was on his day off, but he has accepted this impromptu assignment because he, damn it, loves a good story. And he tries to have it both ways. He tries to pick up his daughter and take her to the zoo, but he's got to do it quick. He says, honey, we're going to play a game called Speed Zoo. And he pushes her on a stroller through the Oakland Zoo as fast as he can. She wants to see the hippopotamus. And he, at one point, I don't know if you guys caught this, they do go past the hippopotamus enclosure. And he,
I didn't notice. I thought that was the weird absence from the sequence, was there was no actual hippopotamus.
No, he pushes her past it because he's so consumed with his own bullshit that he doesn't even stop. And it is there's something very real to me about, as someone who's, as a child of a divorced dad, there's something very real to me about, dad's trying to like be at once parent and non-parent. In my case, my version of Speed Zoo is my dad on his BlackBerry at Disney World. Like we're on Pirates of the Caribbean, and he's like sending work emails, like with this little device lighting up the underground cavern. Shout out to the Greater Toronto area, by the way, BlackBerry.
Thank you.
Yeah,
not that. Cambridge, Ontario isn't that close to Toronto. It's about an hour and a half away. But I do want to mention that our Ontario Premier Doug Ford, it was discovered during the pandemic that he was still using a BlackBerry. So when public health were sending him these PDFs for him to read, he couldn't look at them because he was using an old fucking phone.
Shout out.
And this accidentally got out during the pandemic. I think somebody was trying to make excuses for the Premier's lack of action on anything and let slip that it's because he has an old phone.
Jesus. Well, he's a patriot, I guess. That's one way of looking at it.
He wanted to stick with a Canadian company.
Exactly.
The Speed Zoo scene is very, very funny, and I think it went viral on social media. Like, I think I think if anybody knows anything in general about true crime, it's that's where the Speed Zoo scene comes from for the Clint fans. But that scene also has this really mawkish music, like
it's got like Saucy Dans le Metro type music in the background, and the shots are really weird. I think it's just fascinating.
It's pure Godard. It's Clint absolutely throwing one out for his European fan base. When I was in Paris in the summer of 1997, an Absolute Power was a huge deal in that city. There were billboards for it up everywhere.
Hell yeah. That rules. Love those guys for that. And a bunch of their other opinions, too.
The other movie that was really huge in Paris while I was there that summer was Mad Dog Time, the Larry Bishop movie with the all-star cast. One of the worst movies ever made. It got like a big theatrical release in France.
They're always doing it so crazy over there. I have a stupid segment that I'd like to include. So is there anything else we'd like to get to before we finish off our thoughts about true crime? I think the moment at the end where Clint's whispering Santa Claus rides alone to himself, and then he sees the now freed Isaiah Washington just out doing Christmas shopping with his kid, and they sort of give each other the bro nod, and that's enough. I think is very wonderfully done, very subtle, and you're just seeing him kind of do a normal thing, but with his family. And there's a way that their lives are forever intertwined, but they're also sort of strangers to each other, which I think acknowledges the kind of transactional nature of this true crime thing, even though he got this, he saved this man from being executed by getting to the home of
the Gov.
Zion counselor Haman. That guy Anthony Zerbe, he's in the Matrix sequels. He got to his house fast enough. They just kind of, their relationship now, necessarily, I think Clint has to like steer clear of this guy because he has no value to him anymore.
You can't get too close to your subject either, right?
Yeah.
Like he's a professional. I do want to mention though that this movie is a pro drunk driving movie because at the beginning of the film, Michelle dies in a drunk driving accident, basically. Like she's pretty clearly inebriated when she leaves Clint, and then gets plows the car into a truck and dies instantly. And Clint can successfully navigate Dead Man's Curve while paced.
Yeah, he does like an e-brake drift, actually.
Yeah. He does like a Ronin style drift. And Clint says that he's a fucking great driver or whatever, like while he's
the best
trying to light a cigarette, the best fucking driver in the world or whatever. Yeah. But I haven't seen too many movies where drunk driving actually made a difference.
Right. Well, if she hadn't been killed, maybe Clint wouldn't have been able to get Isaiah Washington off the table, Yeah,
he proves, like that in a way, journalism and alcoholism is related. Like
they go together. Yeah.
Clint is off the sauce for almost all of this movie, even though he's hanging around in a bar drinking Virgin Caesars when he's trying to mac on the young, reporter. We find ourselves back in the bar doing it again, kind of like Femme Fatale in a way. Like the movie goes back to this place that we saw earlier in the movie, and there's a do-over. Like Clint shows you, this is how you leave a bar while shit-faced and drive. And Clint's car, by the way, in this movie is incredible. How shitty his car is. I was kind of really loving all the scenes of Clint driving around Oakland, smoking. You know, like this is... Clint is the poet of the everyday and the ordinary for me. Like, so, I'm perfectly happy to watch a movie that has about 5 minutes of Clint driving around smoking.
Yeah, I forget which critics who wrote some type of retrospective on Clint highlighted his ability to represent real time, regardless of like the narrative time. And I think that I was thinking about during this watch.
I mean, I think that is one of the consequences of his first take or even filmed rehearsal style. He mentions that there's another special feature on the Blu-ray, which is more relevant to the film, where he talks about how he likes those little mistakes that you get because it lends a sense of realism to the proceedings, which like sometimes you do hear people sort of stumble over a word in a way that is what happens in real life, except on this podcast. Obviously, we've never done that, but we're professionals.
Yeah.
Quick shout out also to Sidney Poitier, the daughter of Sidney Poitier. Her name is spelled with a Y, from Death Proof. She plays Jane March, who is one of the workers in the newsroom, and not the actress Jane March, who is, I believe, in
From The Color of Night,
the Bruce Willis penis movie.
One more thing that connects true crime to the cinema of 1999 is it's the other movie from that year directed by a legendary filmmaker that ends in a toy store at Christmas time.
Oh,
I noticed that Clint and Kubrick both end their movies with a significant scene in a toy store at Christmas.
I wish that Lucy Liu had said to Clint that there's only one thing left to do. Fuck. Heartbreak feels good in a place like a toy store at Christmas time.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
Ian, any final thoughts?
Yeah, I just wanted to shout out as a representation of, we've talked about many of the faulty elements of investigation and condemnation of people. But I referenced earlier eyewitness testimony, and I just wanted to say that Dale Porterhouse, I'm not sure we've mentioned it over the course of this.
Yep, Michael Jeter, the great Michael Jeter,
is the key witness identifying Frank Beecham as the guilty party. And the film does a great job. And again, I'm curious how much of this is in the Andrew Klavan's right-wing book, but eyewitness testimony. I want to shout out, there's this psychologist named Elizabeth Loftus, who has basically single-handedly been responsible for showing how faulty testimony is, or memory is in general. She's come up with a lot of these things. I don't know. You guys have maybe heard about the Lost in the Mall thing, where she was able to convince like 25% of people in an experiment that they had a childhood experience of being lost in a mall. And there's a bunch of other similar things that she's done, which are all really fascinating. But the film hates on a bunch of them, talking about like the fact that people will identify elements that fit with schema, like pre-existing ideas they have about how a crime should go. So the idea of like a black man having a gun when he in fact did not. And then also repetitions being part of the way that false narratives get created. You know, like every time you access a memory and recount it to somebody, you change it to match different things.
Porterhouse even says something about like, usually when I talk to journalists, they ask me about that. Like he's got he's got a little way he does his interview. Same with Beecham. He like has sort of ready-made answers to what he thinks the interview is going to be. So there's a way that people like sort of media train themselves as well.
Yeah, exactly.
And the police also, when they are trying to get, when they're interrogating people, they sometimes give them leading questions to get them to answer them, which, you know, help to establish the official version that the cops are trying to create. The way that like sometimes people ask little children questions, and the questions are built in a way that you affirm the answer, you know, so you get the answer that you're asking them to give you.
Yeah, there's this process called memory conformity also that I think is the reason that they've tried to drop those questions. And one of the sort of like, you know, very weak reforms that the police have gone through. But yes, because of what you're talking about, Jesse, where if you start to suggest to people that an event was one way, especially if they feel that they're in the minority or the other person is an authority figure, then they will actually remember it happening that way.
Yeah. By the way, just apropos of nothing, our listeners have always liked the show, and they are big fans of it, and they were telling us about it before, and they're going to send us money in the mail.
It's true.
Did want to mention also true crime journalism real quick. The film is not actually all that involved with what we now know as the true crime industry, but I don't know about you guys. I'm not crazy about it. I find it gross. I find it perverse in a way. I know I do want to acknowledge that especially podcasts like My Favorite Murder or shows like SVU they do provide some form of comfort for especially women who experience a level of constant fear from the world that we all live in. But there is a way that documentedly true crime fiction and true crime like culture have been correlated to basically increased opinions of the police. People are more in favor of they are more favorable toward uses of force, especially when they've been consuming true crime content. And there was a great article that I read in the New Republic from a couple of years ago by Andrea Den Hood about My Favorite Murder and true crime generally, that says that I'm going to quote her here. They treat true crime as an essentially personal and non-political subject, so the focus is on the specifics of the story at hand and on the emotional payoff of solving cases and claiming vengeance, which I think is a very apt way to put it. I don't know, how do you guys feel about true crime stuff?
I'm against true crime as entertainment. I think that it's gross when people sort of make those kind of My Favorite Murder kind of things. Like the thing that I can never get out of my head when it comes to that stuff is that there are people who were victims of these things. And I would include the families of the people that, were killed, and also the families of the people who have a murderer in the family. The idea of that all ultimately being sludge for some entertainment program with soy banter and sort of, I must have been awkward getting hit in the head with a hammer. Awkward kind of stuff. Like, I think I think it's gross to the point that I won't subject myself to stuff like that. I'm in favor of documentaries doing these kind of things if they're handled well, like, something like The Thin Blue Line is fine with me because it got a guy off death row.
Very similar
the film
to
that I
this
mentioned
film,
earlier in the show, Murder on a Sunday Morning, I give my highest recommendation to. You must be able to find it somewhere. But I think that films that get people who shouldn't be in jail or on death row out are more worthy than stuff that tries to trade on murder and true crime as subject matter for, the Casper bed commercial that's coming up next on our sponsored podcast.
Yes, I agree. And I've heard this argument that you talked about, Jake, for catharsis, particularly for women identifying people, which I totally understand. I understand that they're made to feel like their fear is unnecessary a lot of the time. So it's nice to sort of see it confirmed in some ways, or feel that, their frustration is legitimate. I've also heard arguments that it's maybe anti-police in some regards, because it's often highlighting the mistakes police have made, or that it can be even kind of like racial justice focused. Unfortunately, I'm with you guys. The entertainment aspect of it really undermines that to me. And the idea of home detectives, or whatever they call it, internet detectives. Because again, the focus shifts towards crime solving as like a worthy process in itself, or something heroic, instead of thinking about, like you're saying, Jesse, both the victims and the perpetrators as people who we want to just help and ultimately just like reduce harm as much as possible. And I'm not sure you can be a Sherlock Holmes and also be invested in just saying, well, what can we do in general to make society better, to reduce crime, etc.
Yeah. And Jesse, I just want to thank you again for filling in on short notice when Adnan Syed pulled out of the episode.
Anytime, boys.
Yeah, he's very funny. And we'd love to have him on some other time. Jay as well.
I guess this is the danger of when you have a guest on and they only watch the movie a couple of days before the recording. Like, maybe he didn't know what true crime was about.
Exactly. He watched something else. He watched Making a Murderer or something. Yeah, by the way, the next week's episode is about Bo Bergdahl, and it's going to be really boring, and no one's going to like it. I think I'm out of serial jokes at this point. Well, that's basically our discussion on true crime, but of course, we would be remiss here on Pod Casty For Me if we didn't make a stop off in the Pinecone crime zone.
Attention, scumbag. You are now entering the Pinecone crime zone. No, you can't see my badge number.
This is, I just made that like about 7 o'clock this morning. This is, of course, where we check in on the sheriff's log of the Carmel Pinecone newspaper. And of course, comes out on Fridays. We all know that. So these selections are from the March 19th, 1999 issue of the Pinecone.
Classic issue of the Pinecone.
One of the best. There's some kind of public debate about a road being built. But I just want to run through these real quick because this is the kind of stuff that's going on in Carmel that the police are being called to deal with. Now, we've got March 7th, 1999. In Big Sur, Florida resident reported being injured at Lucia, I assume that's a restaurant, when the wind caused a door to strike her. She declined medical attention. Woman called the police on a door.
They could have gotten Doherty Harry to take care of that.
We love having the man on the show. Gonna do a big applause for that one. March 8th, 1999, Carmel by the Sea. Assistance provided to a person locked out of his room at a Junipero Street Inn. Manager contacted. Apparently you can just call the cops if you're locked out of your hotel room. This is in Carmel by the Sea. Same day. Report of 2 golden retrievers at large. Area check made. Dogs were gone on arrival. So it's just a crime wave over there. And so many of these that I didn't include here were just door found unlocked, window found open, and like nothing happened.
This is like Canadian news. Here,
yes.
That
exactly.
would be a top story in Toronto. Door found unlocked.
3 days. March 9th in Carmel Valley. Anonymous report of a subject filling his scuba tanks in the front yard of his Paseo del Rio residence. The noise of the compressed air going to the scuba tanks was bothering the neighbors. Subject complied and stopped filling the tanks.
Thank God.
Now, fascinating to me that Clint Eastwood would choose to live in a community like this, where people are so in each other's business that it's...
Well, he tried to
the
fix
tension
things.
sounds like you could cut it with a knife in this town.
Yes. Yeah. March 10th, Carmel by the Sea, report of an angry call from a customer who had chipped his tooth on some food. Advised to call if the customer came into the store and caused a disturbance.
Wow.
No, I mean, there's people will call in about, heavy breathing, repeated like stalking on the phone, things like that. But also one guy called once because his sandwich hurt him. In Carmel area, same day, March 10th, report of a rocking chair and small bedside table missing from the living room of a deceased's Valverde residence, which I find quite interesting. Here's some real violence for you. Carmel area, a marshal for the Rancho Cañada golf course reported finding 2 men on the 4th hole of the West Course. They hadn't paid the greens fees. The men were taken to the pro shop where they threatened to beat up the reporting party if he didn't get out of their way so they could leave.
Well, the coolest guys in Carmel.
But is this false imprisonment on his part? You got to let him go. What are you going to try to... I mean, yeah, they played golf without paying to play golf, which, like, okay, I guess that's technically a crime. One of the more victimless crimes I've ever heard of. And then lastly, on March 13th, 1999, in Carmel by the Sea, a Lincoln resident reported that when he woke up after drinking heavily and passing out about 10 a.m., his computer was gone. Computer found on doorstep of individual married to the victim's ex-wife. Computer returned to victim. No investigation wanted, just information only. And now, I don't know about, this is what I think happened here, is I think this guy got so drunk that he forgot how to send an email, and he delivered it in person.
So he brought the actual computer over.
Yeah, he just brought a Word document. So that's what's going on in the Pinecone crime zone around this time in 1999.
This was before cell phones, right? Like, so it was very difficult to receive an email. In 1999.
I wanted to make sure it was received
This
live.
movie is set in a sort of pre-internet period. Nick Pinkerton also pointed out on Twitter that True Crime also is, to date, the only Clint movie where we see him using a LexisNexis database on a computer.
Oh, yeah. I loved that LexisNexis moment. That was wonderful to see.
And he types pretty slowly while he's doing it, which I enjoyed.
That's probably accurate for, like,
I think so.
hard-nosed reporters. The two-fingered typing.
Yeah. Exactly. I believe also, I forgot to look this up. I'm going to do it live on the pod. So in the background of the scene in Clint's house, or Clint's wife's house, there is a large stuffed Peckle, who is, of course, also known as Peckle, a fictional duck character created by Sanrio. So there's a friend of Hello Kitty is in the film. I did just recently, because yesterday I was lucky enough to see a 35mm print of Takeshi Kitano's brother here in Los Angeles. And so I Googled Eastwood and Kitano, and there is a extraordinarily pixelated photo of the two of them standing together. Just a wonderful sight. But I wonder if Clint is aware of Peckle.
There's a wonderful photo. Remember when everyone was so mad about Richard Jewell in 2019? Yeah. And there's a wonderful photo of Clint and Bong Joon-ho together at the dinner. And it's like, how bad can Clint be if Bong wants to hang out with him?
Exactly.
Like game recognized game is what I'm saying. Like, Clint is a god.
He is maybe the most famous man on earth, I think, in a way. Like, I wonder if you look at those, the people do those awareness tests or whatever, and you find out that Mickey Mouse eclipsed Jesus, and there's like a bunch of hand-wringing articles written about it. But like, Clint's got to be pretty high up there, right? I mean,
well, the true heads know, there were all these people who were complaining about Richard Jewell because of the things that are so obvious there to be complained about. Like the MAGA people liked it, and it was mean towards the Olivia Wilde was playing a sort of, a sort of sexy harpy in that movie, and people sort of decided that they wouldn't listen to anything else that the movie had to say.
Right.
But I think lovers of film and appreciators of art and difficult art would go, wow, that was a really great Clint movie, especially considering that he started making it in May and it was out in November, and is such a solid piece of work.
I mean, the Richard Jewell, by far the most requested film by people we've asked to come on the show. I'm going to send you guys both the picture of Clint and Takeshi just for fun on the chat here, just for your own pleasure.
Really good.
Yeah.
Both men firmly in their elements here. Yeah.
Well, and he's often called like the Japanese Clint Eastwood, which is not that cool. But anyway, that's just about going to do it for us on our true crime episode. Jesse Hawken, thank you so much for joining us on Pod Casty For Me. Really appreciate you being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
And by the way, when I die in the hurricane later today, it show's yours if you want it. Do you have anything you'd like to plug? You'd like to let folks know about? Any films you'd like to illegally promote as a member of SAG?
I would like to encourage your listeners to check out my podcast, Junk Filter. We're doing a series right now throughout the summer on Miami Vice, the TV show. It's funny because it was something that I wanted to do a show on Miami Vice, and then it turned into a series on Miami Vice that was going to go all summer. And now it's turning into a series that I'm afraid when summer is over, I won't be allowed to do Miami Vice episodes anymore. So it's become it's such a rich topic that I keep coming up with guests and episodes to talk about and without repeating myself too much. So, I'm a little blue because at some point summer's going to turn into fall and I'm going to have to wrap up the Vice series. But that's just one of the many things that I've talked about on the show. And we also have a Patreon where my listeners who support the program directly get bonus episodes. So we're at patreon.com/junkfilter, and on Twitter, we're at junkfilterpod. But you can listen to the show wherever you get your podcasts.
It's a wonderful show, and the Miami Vice episodes and also the Miami Vice photographic content that you've been sharing on Twitter is terrific. I also want to shout out an episode you did, I think, a few months ago on the glory of Tubi, which is a streaming service that we champion here on the show as well. Just a fantastic service and a fantastic episode of your show. Thanks again for joining us. Remember to subscribe, rate us, write a review. It helps us on the algo. If you like the show, tell a friend, tell your dad, write it on a sign that you hold up outside of the prison. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Pod Casty For Me if you have any comments, questions, or concerns, or you're interested in co-hosting a 2-person Clint Eastwood podcast. You can email us at podcastyforme@gmail.com. Thank you to Jeremy Allison for our artwork. Unrelated man, but I wanted to shout out Darren Allison, who runs the Clint Eastwood Archive website, who has become a friend to the show and has sent us a number of lovely emails and does just the Lord's work over there. So shout out to Darren. Next week, we are, of course, talking Space Cowboys, which is a film about what if some old guys went to space. They might do it a little better than some of these young folks. And that's a film that you can watch in all the regular places if you're here in the United States. Ian, what about down there in Mexico? Where can people watch Space Cowboys?
I will say, first of all, Space Cowboys is certainly the Clint Eastwood film that I was first aware of as a child coming out live.
We spoke about this a few episodes ago. I think this might be the only Clint Eastwood movie I've seen in a first run in a movie theater, to my great shame, is Space Cowboys.
It's available also usual places, Apple TV, Amazon, and Google Play.
No, they don't call it Apple TV down there in Mexico. And someone from another 1999 film and a future space cowboy himself is gonna tell us what they call it there.
Mom's on the TV. Mom's on the TV.
Do you guys have any idea who this is supposed to be?
Mom's on the TV.
It's, of course, a man who shares his initials with this film, Tom Cruise, letting us know about.
Okay.
I thought it was Hugh Grant, actually.
Mom's on the TV.
That'd be good too.
Yeah.
Someone should send Hugh Grant to space for his next movie.
I will add quickly, you're doing
Please.
Space Cowboys next, is that Donald Sutherland is one of the spacemen, and he's the pride of Canada, and Canada will never shut up about any Canadian who's been in outer space. They are practically going to be put on the money. We are so obsessed with space and the space program in Canada that for years the $10 bill had the Canada arm on it that used to be on the space shuttle, their little tool that they would pick up stuff in space with. It's a Canadian design, and we will not shut up about. Anytime Canadians are in space, that's huge news.
They should put.
So we
Donald
went
Sutherland
crazy
on the
for
money.
the Donald Sutherland Space Cowboy movie here. It might have done better in Canada than in America.
Well, Canada's right on that count because it's a fun film, and of course, Donald Sutherland's son Kiefer is in the upcoming Juror number 2.
That's right. I'll be there opening day.
Clint needs to work with Juliette Lewis. I think he still hasn't worked with Juliette Lewis, to my knowledge. Is that right? Jeffrey's daughter.
I don't think so. Yeah, you're right. He should. Oh well,
because she's she's on Yellow Jackets, having a moment as ever. She's in Ma. Clint probably loved Ma, almost certainly.
Sure.
Anyway, I should let all of you go, including the listeners. Thanks again for listening to the show, Ian. Keep it up, bud. Doing great over there.
Cautious
thanks,
words
Jesse.
of encouragement you can offer for my various ventures. It was a pleasure to have you, Jesse. And I do want to remind you that you're the boss. Summer is in the mind of the
It's the state of
beholder.
mind.
So
Yeah.
just do whatever you like. Although maybe for our listeners, Jesse's podcast, clearly better. He is considering what you would like to listen to. So maybe it's a testament to it being worth checking out.
Absolutely. And yeah, we will, we promise never to consider the listening experience once. Thanks everybody. Bye.
Thank you.